Have you ever believed in something? I mean, really believed in it, only to watch the people around you just start walking away? It's the kind of thing that can shake you right down to your core. So today we're going to break down a three-part framework for how to stay confident when you're facing that kind of social pressure. And it's drawn from a sermon by Pastor Stephen Wilhoit that, you'll see, connects a really old story to a problem that feels very, very modern. All right, let's dive in.
But first, let me ask you something. Could you be convinced you're wrong even when you know you're right? Seriously, imagine you see something with your own two eyes. It's obvious, it's clear as day. But what if every single person you're with insists you're seeing it wrong? Could that pressure make you doubt reality itself? That's the powerful psychological tug-of-war we're getting into today.
Well, it turns out this exact scenario was famously put to the test in a classic study in social psychology. It's called the Ash line experiment. And wow, does it show just how easily group pressure can make us question what's right in front of our faces.
So here's the setup. A person walks into a room with a bunch of other people who they think are also participants, but they're actually actors. They're all shown a super simple puzzle. Just match a line to one of three other lines of the same length. The answer is completely obvious. But one by one, the actors all confidently give the same, blatantly wrong answer. And that leaves the real participant, who has to answer last, with a choice. Do I trust my own eyes, or do I go along with the group?
So what do you think happened? The results were pretty shocking. In the version of the story used in the sermon, the outcome was just dramatic. 9 times out of 10, the person caved. They just went along with the group's wrong answer, totally losing confidence in the simple truth they could clearly see.
And this experiment is such a perfect modern example of the ancient problem that the sermon is really getting at. What happens when your community, your group, starts walking away from a belief you hold dear? It creates this very personal confidence crisis.
You see the parallel, right? On one side, you've got the person in the lab starting to doubt their own eyesight because the group says they're wrong. And on the other, you had this biblical scene where Jesus' closest followers are watching a mass exodus as tons of other disciples just get up and leave. The psychological pressure is exactly the same. Wait, if everybody else is leaving, could I be the one who's wrong?
So, what triggered this mass exodus in the first place? Well, according to the story, it wasn't some kind of physical threat. It was an idea. Jesus gave a teaching that his followers found really difficult, and frankly, offensive.
Their reaction was immediate and pretty blunt. They basically said, "This is a hard saying. Who can even listen to this stuff?" They were just completely thrown and pushed away by the very words from the leader they had chosen to follow.
But what does hard actually mean here? The sermon breaks it down into 3 really interesting layers. First, there was just a conceptual misunderstanding. They took his metaphors about eating his flesh and drinking his blood literally. Yikes. Second, even if they got the metaphor, they just didn't agree with the spiritual demands it made. And third, and this is probably the one we can all relate to, they just plain didn't like it. They didn't want it to be true.
Okay, so if you're facing that kind of rejection, how on earth do you hold on to your confidence? This is where the framework comes in, with 3 strategies. The first one is a huge mental shift. Expect offense.
And here's the key idea. If you know that pushback is coming, if you anticipate it, it doesn't blindside you. Rejection stops being a sign that you failed, and instead becomes a predictable, maybe even necessary part of the whole process.
Now, this idea is grounded in a specific theological belief that some spiritual ideas are just going to sound like folly, like nonsense, to people who aren't looking at it from the same spiritual perspective. So the expectation is baked right in that the message isn't going to land with everybody, because in this view, it takes a different kind of perception to get it.
All right, on to strategy number 2. This one builds on the first, and it's all about understanding the hidden mechanics. The behind-the-scenes process of how belief actually works, at least according to this framework.
So the pastor makes this really clear distinction between 2 ways of seeing. There's physical sight, which he calls the flesh, and he argues that it's basically useless for grasping spiritual truth. And then there's spiritual sight, which is given by the Spirit, and it's seen as absolutely essential to really get and accept these ideas. The sermon uses a great analogy. Think about it like this. If you find a fancy watch on the ground, you might not be sure it even works. But if a watchmaker opens it up and shows you exactly how all the tiny gears and springs are working together perfectly, your confidence that it can tell time just skyrockets. In the same way, understanding the process of how belief works is supposed to build your confidence in the outcome.
So here's the 4-step process the sermon lays out. It's a sequence. First, The Father grants the ability to believe. Second, the Spirit gives spiritual life. Third, this happens through a specific means, the teaching or the word. And it's only after all that, fourth, that the person then acts and believes. For the disciples sticking around, seeing this divine machinery at work would have given them confidence, even as others were heading for the exit.
And that brings us to the third and final strategy for keeping your head up during a setback. This one shifts from understanding the process to trusting the purpose. It's all about trusting that everything that's happening, even the bad stuff, is part of a bigger plan.
The core idea here is that Jesus knew from the very beginning who was going to leave. He even knew who was going to betray him. And the fact that none of this was a surprise is presented as the very source of confidence. It means the rejection wasn't a failure of the plan. It was part of the plan all along.
Here's one last analogy the sermon uses. It's like you're on a really dangerous safari. You don't need to know where every lion is hiding or where every patch of quicksand is. You just need to trust the guide who has the map and knows the way. In this framework, trusting the leader who sees the whole picture is what gives you peace.
So, let's just quickly recap this whole framework for having confidence in a setback. Number 1, expect offense. Rejection isn't failure, it's normal. Number 2, understand the process. Knowing the how builds confidence in the what. And number 3, trust the plan. Setbacks aren't surprises, they're part of a bigger design. And that really leaves us with one final, much bigger question. One that applies to just about any belief system we might have, whether it's religious, political, or even scientific. Where does that line exist between having confidence in a process you trust and needing absolute 100% certainty about the outcome? It's a tough balance, and definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks for tuning in.